Hey guys, if you could get the interpretation to do a test on the English channel, please, and then on the French channel, that would be great. Thank Merci beaucoup. It works really well. Thank you. Hi again, interpreters. So we were able to hear you on Zoom. So I was wondering if you could please do another sound check for us.
Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in about a minute. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December 4th, 2025 meeting of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. I'll ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Luloff.
In the flesh.
Councillor Skalski.
Here.
Vice Chair Kelly.
EC.
And Chair Brown. You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of the ARAC meeting of Thursday, the 6th of November, 2025 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you very much. I know listed on the agenda as item 4.1 is the 2025 draft capital and operating budget. However, with the will of committee, I'm going to hold that item because we have, I believe, an item that will carry quite quickly. It's listed on the agenda as item 5.1, third concession municipal drain appointment of engineer. This is in Osgood Ward. We do have staff here, and I know the gentlemen who are impacted by this, the requesters of this work, are in attendance as well. If it's the will of committee to carry this item, do you wish to speak to it? I don't know if they done. Perfect.
Is that a hi? I support the recommendation of staff and have nothing to add unless there's questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. I believe Councillor Skalski does have a question for staff.
Thanks. So just one question. So appreciating that this is at the stage where we're just appointing an engineer, but I've heard from some residents who are concerned about potential future costs. Sorry, I'll let you get on here, David. Okay. So the question was really to better understand a bit about the process and how this works to attribute future maintenance cost.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, this is the initial step in the process. So there's a petition for drainage works by the landowner developer. The engineer at this point really has no idea what the scope of the work is. So their first responsibility is to meet with the petitioners and kind of determine what the scope of the works might be. Future assessments and assessments for the work will be determined further along in the process, like quite a bit further along in the process. So it's really early on in the process to make that determination. So it will be made by the drainage engineer though.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The report recommends that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend council appoint Mr. Andy Robertson of Robinson Consultants, Inc. as the engineer of record to prepare a report under Section 8(1) of the Drainage Act in response to a petition received under Section 4 of the Drainage Act as described in this report. Is this item carried? Thank you, colleagues. And Cyril, I guess we'll go back to the budget. Looking forward to seeing all of the good work that your team has done in preparing this, and I'm sure there'll be some questions from my colleagues, but we'll turn it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of ARAC Committee. So what you're going to see today is pretty much consistent what you would have seen in all of our presentations this year. We've tried to keep it consistent and kind of focus on core things. You can go to the next slide. I'll give a quick overview of the operating capital budget, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues to walk through some of the highlights. I will say this is not quite the smallest budget. It's just shy of winning out the OAG budget. The OAG budget is a little bit smaller. So this is the second last in terms of the smallest. But what you do get is the most senior leaders at the table. So this is the committee where you have the most presence from the GM table. You beat out Pewick by 1. So as you can see, you have 5 of us here today. So that's the importance of this budget. You can go to the next slide. What I also say as well is it's 3.7 million budget from a gross perspective. There's a lot of other investments that do go into the rural area that you do not see in this committee. So it's a little bit misleading. And all jokes aside, when I talk about the size of the budget, much more bigger in terms of investments into the rural area. And what I'll also say is, and you'll see throughout the presentation, is this term of council, there's been significant shift in how we've been doing investments in the rural area, partly because of this committee and the endorsement of this committee. And you'll see some of that as we go through the presentation. So again, overall $3.7 million gross expenditure budget. There's no FTEs in this, no additional FTEs. We do have 20 FTEs dedicated to this committee. And then we have a small budget of 14.3. Again, within the preview of this committee, and the next slides as we go forward, we'll speak to much bigger numbers. So don't just get folks that the rural committee is only getting 14 million. The rural communities are getting much, much more than that. And we'll talk about that. So from a capital perspective, this is how the capital program is funded overall. A little bit of debt, mainly from cash and reserves, given the nature of these investments from the citywide cash reserve. We have basically only 5 projects overall, a little bit of debt, and that debt is really allocated to the facilities, the building in Corkery, in Councillor Kelly's ward. So next slide. So within the overall 14 million, here's the breakdown. Climate change, 1.8 million. That's the acquisition of rural properties, parks and rec and culture. That's where you see the Corkery facilities. That's the facility out in Councillor Kelly's ward I just mentioned. Then on the transportation side, you have the combination of the rural ditching, guardrail program, and then there's a little bit of rural roads. And again, much more rural road investments, which Tammy will speak to as we move to the next slide. And I pass it over to Marcia.
Great, thank you very much. So the portion of the city budget that is related to planning services in rural areas, largely that goes to staff the multidisciplinary review of the development applications that come before this committee. I think that you're all very familiar with planning items being a large portion of the agenda here. I think what we've also tried to do is on the bigger policy items where there is an impact to the rural community, we're doing a lot more joint meetings with the planning and housing committee so that we get both perspectives, even where we may have only a legislative responsibility to go to one. We've been trying to do more joint committees, and through the indulgence of both chairs and very long agendas, including the one coming up in December 17th, I think we're being relatively successful at that. We also staff a small rural office to support the coordination across departments in terms of bringing items to this committee and also keeping that rural focus front and center as initiatives are moving forward. And we manage the Rural Community Building Grant Program. This year we saw 12 grants awarded. It's a $160,000 program, and that is remaining status quo in the 2026 budget.
Morning, Chair and members of committee. Very happy to be here with you today. We're already at the next slide. So infrastructure services is responsible for the city priority that is a city that's more connected with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options. So this is the proposed 2026 budget that you will see for ARAC today. The draft 2026 budget includes investments of approximately 73.8 million in rural infrastructure overall and delivered through other committees like Public Works and Infrastructure and the Environment and Climate Change committees. The 73.8 million includes investment in rural infrastructure like municipal drains, sidewalks, pathways, bridges, road resurfacing, pavement preservation, buildings and parks renewal, and accessibility and energy management investments at city facilities. For example, the Infrastructure and Water Services budget under PWIC allocates $4.8 million for pavement preservation treatments, 37.9 million for rural road and related investments, and that includes 20 million for roads resurfacing that was part of the Ontario-Ottawa deal for the rural road funding agreement with the province. Other notable investments in rural infrastructure include 2.2 million in rehab work on bridges and bridge culverts within the city's right-of-way and approximately 6.5 million for building and park renewals. Additionally, the Infrastructure and Water Services budget under Environment and Climate Change Committee includes 17.1 million for preventative maintenance, rehab, and reconstruction of existing drainage culverts in rural wards. These enhancements will improve capacity to manage more frequent and intense storms, reduce flood risks, and strengthen infrastructure reliability and long-term sustainability. Under the draft ARAC budget, Infrastructure and Water Services is seeking approval for 6.6 million in rural road reconstruction and upgrades to address annual rehabilitation requirements. A specific focus in 2026 is a planned investment of 4 million in guide rail upgrades in the rural wards, creating safer rural roads for both pedestrian and motorists, and 2.6 million for rural road upgrades. These investments preserve and extend the life of the infrastructure and prevent failures that require more extensive reconstruction. Thank you. I will pass it next to Debbie or Alain, sorry.
The other side.
The other side.
Good morning, committee. So from a public works perspective, to build on the comment that Cyril made, there's a lot of resources that are allocated to support the rural areas, even though they're not part and parcel in terms of being approved as part of this budget. The area that I did want to focus on is related to ditching. I know ditching has been extremely important to all rural councillors. We certainly heard it loud and clear through the Rural Summit. And there are important changes through this budget that I wanted to expand on. One is through the efforts of the chair working with Cyril and committee is we're moving the ditching budget from operating to capital to treat it really as a capital asset, which provides more flexibility to staff that if there are projects going to carry over, the funding is going to carry over also with it. So from a funding perspective, that's definitely a win. We're also seeing a doubling of the budget amount from 1.8 to 3.6, half of it funded from tax, half of it funded from rate. So what it allows staff to do is to be able to move from what has traditionally been a very reactive process to one where we can transition to be a lot more proactive. So through 2025, you've seen a lot of engagements with our team in terms of trying to understand your needs or parties. We've worked with the ditch alteration and maintenance sponsors group also to look at how do we increase the focus related to ditches, the understanding between residents and the city as to who has what responsibilities. And I fully anticipate that dialogue will continue throughout 2026, and we'll certainly be starting shortly to identify priorities so that we can build a plan for the coming year. We're also going to be creating a new position on a temporary basis, which is a coordinator role that will have the responsibility of coordinating all of the drainage service requests or plans in a rural area, other than what falls under the municipal drains and the storm ponds. But if it's ditch draining, it will be coordinated through that role to make sure that one is that we leverage synergies across the organization, but also that we are be able to be more efficient in terms of how we're actually allocating and spending the funds. So what you will see is through 2026 is certainly once we have that position in place, is a lot more efficient process. You will have one point of contact when it comes to drainage concerns, and we plan on building on that moving forward. The other items that I wanted to focus on in terms of continuous improvement, albeit they are not directly tied to the budget, they still have a direct impact on this committee. So I certainly spoke about the drainage, and the drainage will continue to be a main focus. Other areas that we have and are working on improvements, one is related to pavement markings. You've certainly heard a lot of concerns in general around pavement markings, the fact that they fade more quickly. We've actually, through 2025, allocated more resources to pavement markings during the daytime in a rural area and looking at better quality paint, hoping that we're able to see basically more resiliency in terms of that paint. So we're going to continue to build on that program. Traffic calming, we are reviewing basically our traffic calming programs between ourselves and my colleague Marcia in terms of the temporary traffic calming, the neighborhood traffic calming, to streamline the process. And I know this is a sore point for some of the rural councillors in terms of how those budgets can be allocated. So that will certainly be a discussion point that we're also going to be having in 2026 before we come to council with or move forward with a revised strategy. And then the last one is related to our signalized and always stop intersections. Another key focus of the Rural Summit was ensuring that we're applying a rural lens to our decisions. So we went back to look at our traffic signals in terms of how do we apply that rural lens when we're looking at basically the ones that are warranted What we found is, albeit that we had applied a rural lens, there were still areas that we could fine tune our process, which we have implemented. When we looked at the always stop warrants, we identified a gap when it came to the rural areas, and we addressed that gap through a report that came to ARAC earlier this year. So that rural lands will continue to certainly be part of our focus as we move forward. So, Mr. Chair, I'll hand it over now to Debbie for the final part of the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. So as Cyril mentioned, the Strategic Initiatives Department does have a small capital proposed budget in this 2026 budget. It's 1.8 for the Rural Environmental Lands Acquisition Program, but I actually wanted to focus my remarks on economic development, just recognizing the importance of economic development for members of the committee. And while there isn't a specific budget line attached to this, staff have been working on it and will continue to work on it in 2026. So as you know, the Rural Economic Development Action Plan is being updated. It will reflect the comments and the outcomes of the 2024 Rural Economic Summit. So that's one thing that'll be incorporated, but staff have also been undertaking fairly significant outreach to more than 40 rural partners. And this includes rural associations, businesses, local organizations, and other interest holders, as well as city departments. Based on the feedback that's received today, I can give you a little bit of what we see as the key areas of focus kind of emerging, with the recognition that the city staff, the economic development services staff, will engage with each one of you in the new year with the more detailed findings and the directions of this particular plan. So to date, we're really seeing a focus on supporting the marketing of rural experiences and business offerings. So that's a key area that's emerging in the consultations, expanding the entrepreneurial and business support. There was quite a number of commentary and feedback with regards to connecting rural businesses with one another, but also enhancing the connection to city services and facilitating that process. And then collaborating in terms of helping businesses and others seek rural funding opportunities. So those are really what we're seeing emerging currently and what we see as primary areas of focus. More to come through that individual consultation. And we will be providing an update on the rural economic development strategy in the first quarter as part of the overall update on the economic development strategy and action plan. Thank you. Back to Cyril.
That concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get the vice chair to read in a technical amendment before we read in the roadmap, if you don't mind, Vice Chair.
It would be my pleasure, Chair. Whereas the 2026 draft operating and capital budget documents for the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee were circulated and published with the committee agenda on November 25th, 2025. And whereas after the agenda was published, a correction was required to the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee draft 2026 budget documents, specifically to the project description for the capital project 911289-24-26 rural roads upgrades. And whereas Finance and Corporate Services has issued a revised Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee draft 2026 budget book, which includes the updated project description below on page 17 of the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee full English budget book. Therefore, be it resolved, the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee approved the replacement of page 17 of the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee full English budget book with the corrected project description for capital project 911289-24-26 rural road upgrades, as shown in the table contained in this motion and on file with the city clerk. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is that carried? Thank you. And if you'd like to read in the roadmap motion now.
The Agricultural and Rural Affairs, is that the roadmap? The Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that the council sitting as committee of the whole approve the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee 2026 draft operating and capital budget as follows. 1, planning, development, building services, development review and rural affairs operating budget as follows. 1, user fees, page 4, 2, operating resource requirement, page 3, and 2, the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee capital program, page 5, individual projects listed pages 10 to 18, including revised page 17. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And is that carried? Thank you. Sorry, we'll wait to do that. I was jumping the gun. I was all excited. No, you're good. I just asked for the vote far too early. Cyril wanted to get out of here and faster than Peewick. And would you like to read in the motion on my behalf so it's part of the discussion as well? The ditching motion?
Okay, I'm reading this in on behalf of Vice Chair Brown. Whereas oversight and direct service delivery in rural Ottawa, including increasing maintenance standards for rural drainage assets such as roadside ditches, is a priority for rural residents and for council. And whereas rural roadside ditch maintenance has not been performed at an acceptable standard since amalgamation, and responsibility for drainage assets is currently dispersed amongst several different groups within the city of Ottawa. And whereas the roads rural ditch maintenance program provides a dedicated capital envelope for rural drainage maintenance, and as part of Rural Summit 2024, the city committed to improving rural service levels, including rural drainage and roadside ditch maintenance. And whereas the roads rural ditch maintenance program budget is set to 3.6 million, funded 50% by rate and 50% by tax supported sources. And the rural stormwater fee capital budget is flexible enough to cover all related capital costs, including ditching work, brushing, trucking, materials, culverts, asphalt, etc., equipment, handheld tools, vehicles, and attachments. The project coordinator position to facilitate the work, hiring contractors to carry out the work, and in-house budgetary allocations for city staff. Therefore, be it resolved that as part of the implementation of the city commitments from the 2024 Rural Summit and the substantive investments made in rural roads, rural ditch maintenance program, staff be directed to ensure that the new project coordinator position has the capacity to action drainage projects in a timely and efficient manner to support effective delivery of service to rural taxpayers and landowners. And be it further resolved, the staff be directed to seek input from each rural councillor on drainage priorities for each ward before January 15th, 2026. And be it further resolved that a work plan prioritizing the delivery of drainage projects and their operational requirements be developed by the General Manager of Public Works in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee, and that this work plan be shared with the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee and Ditch Alteration and Maintenance Sponsors Group by way of memo in Q1 2026. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Now we'll go to questions to staff. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much. During the presentation, we mentioned a new rural economic development action plan. I think that's a wonderful undertaking. Recognizing that our rural villages are quite different, like the business ecosystem is quite different than perhaps a traditional, BIA area. There's been a lot of expressed interest in Cumberland Village of establishing a BIA. However, if you apply sort of the same rules that we have in the suburbs or downtown, like their main street only really has, or the main street area only really has like 6 or 7 businesses, but there exists a great deal of home-based businesses, whether that be, accountants. We've got a pretty awesome music studio up in Cambrian Heights. A couple of builders, some farms, and other professional services like massage therapy, physiotherapy, that sort of thing. So given that the rules sort of only apply to sort of like a small geographical area with room for expansion, obviously, as we've seen in a couple of our areas, what can be done to, because I understand that, the levy is placed on a certain tax class, right? So it creates a lot of complications. Should there be home-based or businesses outside of the Main Street area that would like to join sort of an association like a BIA? What mechanisms exist, or can mechanisms be developed to recognize the very different business ecosystem in rural villages or rural areas to perhaps allow for the development of a BIA in a village such as Cumberland Village?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I think that's a really interesting question. So the business improvement area really, as you point out, is about, a lot of it is about beautification of the main streets and really attracting young people to those businesses and that type of thing. So in some cases, the BIA really isn't the right mechanism. There are, outside of the BA, obviously businesses kind of coming together and looking at how they can support each other, but let's take that away and look at what we can do through the update to the strategy. I think that discussion is probably really well placed within the context of developing that strategy. And there will be individual consultations with each one of the members of the committee as well in early new year to bring that feedback into the process of developing the strategy.
I think that beautification is certainly a large portion of what BIAs do, but also like ongoing promotion and awareness of the businesses that are available within a BIA district. So I think that probably some of our rural villages would really benefit from that side of it. And, you know, of course, it'd be wonderful to beautify the main streets. Right now, it's volunteers, the community association, kind of doing that work and funding themselves, hanging banners for Christmas and that sort of thing. They've got planters all around. They're funding that on their own, and you know, frankly, quite a few of the businesses in the area are contributing. But it would be nice to be able to kind of formalize a process by which, you know, more dispersed areas that have home-based businesses might be able to, maybe not as a BIA, but incorporate in some way to be able to support each other, promote, and that sort of thing. So I'll let you take that away, Debbie. I really appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. I did something a little bit differently this year in terms of budget consultation with my residents. I put out a survey. I had several hundred responses. People were ranking their top priority, and it's clear. I think close to 80% of respondents in my ward put road maintenance and road renewal as their top priority. I'm sure that will come as no surprise to any of you who have been here for a while. So I'm going to focus on that. And I remember being really excited when the Premier came to town last year and announced $500 million for the city of Ottawa, and 50 million of it was earmarked for rural road upgrades or renewal or maintenance. And it hasn't been clear to me since that time, you know, how that money's being spent, how much we're getting from the province, whether or not we've got it all. And I think we've chatted about that, Cyril, but can you talk about that, how it's dispersed? It's not obvious to me by looking at the line items where that money's going or how it's being spent. So if you could comment on that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, true, the Chair. So we got 50 million exclusively for rural roads. It was 10, 2020. Now, I think it's shifted a little bit in terms of the actual allocation. I think we got more in one year and allocated more in another year, but the full allotment is allocated to rural roads. So if you go within the budget, it resides in PWIC because the transportation roads resurfacing is there. That's why we called it out here. So the 20 million is there for 2026. I think in 2025 there was 20, and then or a little bit shy of 20, but the residual was in 24. So the full amount is being allocated to rural roads. And that was part of the conditions of the Ontario-Ottawa deal. The spirit of the overall deal was basically providing funding to the city to help with the pressures that we were facing. And fundamentally was based on the uniqueness of Ottawa, our geographical region, and our large rural presence. And that's really where the 50 came from. So it is exclusively for rural roads, exclusively being allocated there, and it is being done. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then I think the next one's probably for Alain. And we discussed this briefly in our last meeting last week or something like that. What was the organization that you used to be a part of that evaluated infrastructure and how to maintain it properly and money that needed to be spent?
Chair, I believe you were referring to the conversation we're having related to the Canadian Infrastructure Report Card.
Yes, that's the one. Thank you very much. Yeah. And that report card does state that, you know, to keep your roads and infrastructure in a state of good repair, that you should be spending at least 2% of the value of your infrastructure each year on maintenance or resurfacing or whatnot. Are we doing that?
So maybe what I'll do is I'll give the answer in the context of that report and then let Tammy fill in terms of where we're at right now. The context of that report was trying to, and this was, the report card now was probably developed about 10 years ago. So the intent was to start providing more of a national perspective around the state of the infrastructure, especially at a municipal level across the country. And through that, there were different benchmarks that were developed around state of the assets, how do we categorize them so that there at least is a consistent process across the country. The level of reinvestment was at that point kind of a benchmark that included all reinvestments in roads, not just the renewal component that Tammy provides. So I think trying to compare that 2% with what's in the budget is kind of an apples to orange comparison. But in terms of the investments, I'll let Tammy speak to that piece.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alain, for that context. So in the asset management plan reports that we brought to council in last June, had identified a funding shortfall around our transportation network for sure. And so what we are working with Cyril and Cyril's team with finance is the next term for the long range financial plan. So we are working with the team to take a look at how we can look to increase investments in all of our road classifications, including local roads and rural roads as well.
I think that would be most welcome right across the city, not just in rural Ottawa. And you know, taking what you've said, Alain, and I certainly understand you know more about this stuff than I do. And I can see Councillor Skalski brought the budget book today, so you can see how thick that is and how navigating that can be complex. But and I'm not an expert, but based on the research I've done and all the indicators that I can see, we're spending far less than 2% on our maintenance each year. And so and maybe Cyril, this came up at the Ward 5 budget consultation meeting, and I thought you did a good job at explaining, you know, the challenges of maintaining a massive network of roads and what that means financially. Could you describe for the committee what the main challenges are in terms of keeping that infrastructure in a state of good repair financially?
Chair, yes. So I will start off by saying this term of council, there's been significant more investments in roads, specifically roads resurfacing. This year's budget, I think, is 70 million. And I think this term of council has been on average about additional 30 million per year on a one-time basis. Part of the challenges, again, it comes to a point where there's a saturation in the marketplace and capacity to actually do it, right? So you come to that fine line of, you know, a blank check is not the solution. It's a combination of, you know, funding and delivery. There's only so much capacity in terms of the trade to do the work. Then when you layer in the network, I'm not an expert in planning, and my colleagues are, you know, just you can't shut down the entire network. If you live in Ottawa this summer, it's been pretty bad in terms of the provincial highway 417 being done, Greenbank, Baseline, everything was gridlocked. So you got to be planning it that way. So I think we're at that point where we're refreshing the LRFP, which will be coming forward early into 2026. We got to start putting that lens on it in terms of, you know, what can we actually deliver, so that way we balance out the funding with the delivery outcome, because it's getting to that frustration point as well, as where the money is there, but we just can't deliver. So we got to figure out how we can massage that a bit better, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to add that because I think it is a lot more complicated than people think from the outside in terms of drumming up the money and the contractors to do all that work. My last question will be for Ms. Stewart, and I'm going to go back to Councillor Luloff's questioning about rural economic development, and I wanted to tie in land acquisition on that. So we've obviously had several discussions this term of council about rural land acquisition, and I know there's a stream for, you know, protecting important rural lands from an environmental perspective. Is there, from the strategic initiatives point of view, an opportunity or any line items in this budget or any mechanisms that you would have for rural land acquisition that would facilitate rural economic development? And I think an example of where that could be beneficial for rural Ottawa would be the village of Carp. It's got quite a few businesses in it and very few places to park, given the you know, the intensification of Carp over the last decade or so. And so serving those businesses with some areas for parking so that people can frequent them might help in the rural context. And I'm sure it's not the only rural village that's experiencing that. So maybe you could comment on the potential for that.
Through the chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor. I'll kick it off, and maybe if my colleague Alain has anything he wants to add just with the connection to parking, I'll turn it over to him as well. So the rural environmental land acquisition program really is about the preservation of wetlands and forest lands along with the OP, so that's correct. The real estate services team does sit within the strategic initiatives department and does have the ability to acquire parcels of land to serve city purposes, which could be to support economic development purposes. So we do have that mechanism to do so. So there's opportunity to have conversation. When it comes to parking, I mean, that is led through Elaine's team in terms of assessing whether the value of that piece. So there would be some collaboration there as well.
Well, I look forward to those discussions in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Skalski.
Thank you, Chair. So I just have a couple of different questions. I'll start with ditching and maybe comments as well. So I'll just start in the universe of roadside ditching. So really grateful that we've made doubled the investment, I guess, this year, because ditching, it certainly is something I hear from residents all over Osgoode Ward, concerns about just not enough proactive ditch work and roadside cleanup happening. But also there are whole neighborhoods that I think maybe as part of pre-amalgamation work where there were buried ditches and concerns now that the culverts are completely in disrepair and need for that sort of broader assessment to be done, a bit of a step back work. So I guess in my mind, I see several different kinds of projects and works in the ditching universe. My question to you really is about if you can provide a sense of how much work was able to be completed under the 2025 budget, and just so that we can have sort of a baseline of what more we can do with double that budget.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, you're right to point out that especially in the rural area, there are different dynamics when it comes to ditches. The whole ditch alteration around pipe ditches is one that we're still struggling with as we move forward, because a lot of them were installed without proper approvals. So there's going to definitely be ongoing discussions with the property owners on those specifically. In terms of the work that took place in 2025, I think we had about, I think we completed about 50 kilometers of ditch maintenance. I don't have the stats handy at my fingertip right now in terms of the number of service requests that we were able to get through. I would anticipate that as we're moving forward and we're dealing with a different funding strategy and also different funding levels, we're going to start to see those numbers increase quite significantly. Because to your point, our hope through this process is that we transition from what traditionally has really been, as I mentioned before, a reactive basis. We get a service request, we add it to the pile, and then we address them kind of in order of priority that we receive them, which is not very efficient when you're looking at from a network perspective. So now that we have more funding, we're going to be able to apply that lens around. It's not just trying to address a service request, it's trying to look at how do we get to these areas even before we start to get to service requests. That's going to take a bit of time to be able to transition to that. But I think what you're going to see is over time is ditching becoming less of a concern because people are going to see more visibility about it. You're also going to see more discussions with residents around the responsibilities, what residents are responsible for when it comes to ditches, and then what the city's responsibility is. Because at times there's a perception that, well, the city should be doing this or doing that, and it's actually an owner responsibility. So part of our focus that we've been working on in 2025 is how do we improve the toolkit and the information that we're also sharing with residents on that. And as we reach out, and I see that there's kind of timelines related to the engagement with the councillors, we will continue to engage with you around the pain points that you're hearing from within your ward, so that we're able to also overlay that with the plans that we're putting forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I know I'm certainly looking forward to being able to offer visuals or some tools to help residents understand their responsibilities versus what the city does in terms of maintenance as well. That's all really great, and I think heading in the right direction. So thank you. The other question I have is, I think to you, Marcia, it's around, it's sort of just a verification on the staffing question. So we said there's 20 FTEs related to rural planning. So during the Rural Summit, we talked about having an increase of investment in the Rural Affairs Office particularly. Can you just clarify how many FTEs are attributed to the Rural Affairs Office and whether this budget represents an actual change in staffing?
Chair, within the Rural Affairs Office, as it stood before, there was 2 FTE positions within it. The additional position was filled in the last number of months. It technically does not sit under the Rural Affairs Office today. It's actually in the General Manager's office. But it is so that it has added that 3rd position. The additional outcome, I think, from the Rural Summit was the identification of rural liaisons within each of the departments, and those have been identified. I think many of them are here today to provide that sort of direct connection within each of the departments to facilitate service requests or issues.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward. I think we have a little get together to meet all the rural liaisons later this afternoon, so that's great. Okay, so 3 is the number now. Okay. My next question is in regards to the rural grants programs. So I think it was you, Marcia, that mentioned $160,000 for the rural community building grants program. I couldn't find the specifics in the book, so it's possible that it's just lumped under something else. But can I just get some clarification on exactly which grant programs are part of the, I guess, the rural lot? So my understanding is there is another program called the Rural Association Partnership Program. Is that still in effect? It looked like it's sort of the last intake was in 2022, and I'm not seeing any line items on it, but it's still on our website.
Yeah, that is correct, Chair. The last intake was in 2022. The sort of the direction we've been going is to fund it through the Rural Community Building Grant Program, because it is more flexible, and there's the groups that could have applied to the Rural Association Partnership Program are also able to apply through the Rural Community Building Grant Program. So they're, we focused the energy on that one intake, and that has greater flexibility and greater opportunity to fund our rural organizations.
But Councillor, you are correct. There is only the one grant, 160,000, that is being proposed in this budget, but we will take your comment about the website and go and make sure that that's accurate for those trying to understand how to navigate.
Okay, excellent, thanks. And I did notice an Ottawa Rural Clean Water Program. So I'm not exactly sure where that falls under, but it is, I was curious what the, I don't know, you're all looking at each other, so it makes me wonder if you know what I'm talking about. It's essentially a program that it has a suite of programs underneath it. So it looked like a very robust program that supported rural clean water projects.
Chair, the Rural Clean Water Program is administered through the conservation authorities, and there is a wide variety of programs. And I don't think there's anybody from the conservation authorities here to speak to that today, but that program is administered through our partners at the conservation authorities.
That helps explain why I couldn't find it in the budget book. Thank you. Okay, and maybe I'll just leave it there. Well, I'll just throw in a comment about the economic development strategy. So really thankful that there's work being done there. I had the pleasure of taking one of your staff with me on a tour, door knocking through one of our business parks to just pop in and see what folks in the rural business parks have top of mind. And I'm pleased to see the direction it's going. It sounds like the observations made there are reflective in some of the early comments that I'm hearing. So that's all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is, I believe, for Dan Chenier, who I think is online. But last year, there was 1.4 million in the budget for a new community building in Rural East, which caught me a bit by surprise. It was part of the 2019 DC background study before I was elected. And then, so when I asked for more information about it, I was told that that funding was to determine a location and start work on design in the next year. But I haven't had an update since, and there is no mention of it in this budget. So wondering what's going on with that.
Chair, the money that's in last year's budget does not get repeated in this one, but that funding is set aside. I don't believe we have started work or identified a site yet for that facility.
Okay, so more discussion to come this year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, just so I can help you.
Yeah.
If you go to our WIPs, you'll still see it there. So the funding is still there. So
okay,
as part of our process, we still provide those projects that are still within the preview of committees that
Okay.
we haven't spent the money. So
Haven't
it's
spent the money.
it's still there, so.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for you. So I believe last year, the chair asked if the solutions identified in the Rural Summit would be reported on sort of individually as part of the ARAC budget with specific line items and the investments targeted to them. And I didn't see that. So I was just wondering, because I believe the answer last year was that that was possible to do that.
Chair, it is possible. I'm not leading that charge, if you will, and I'm not passing that along or anything. That's why you see in this budget, there's a couple call outs in terms of the additional investments. So from a committee governance perspective, is we kind of follow that process from a budget, but in our presentations, we layer in those other investments like the 20 million for rural roads, et cetera, that reside in other committee books. It's funny because at the beginning of the conversation, I said to Tammy, we should probably look at in next term of governance is the why not change more things. I know why we do it the way, because it comes back to the committee term of governance and why most of the road or all the roads are in transportation. But I think we need to look at, is there a way to exclusively move rural investments that go exclusively to rural area? Why can it not be in the committee term of governance? I think that's a takeaway for us through the term of governance process that will be coming up and with Kate and his team, the clerk's team, to look at that differently.
Thank you. That leads well into my next question. The 73.8 million for the investment in rural road infrastructure. That's rural, the 73.8 million.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We don't have an exact science with our systems right now to actually delineate the boundary of, so what we have is the wards. So the $73 million investment includes wards 1, 5, 19, 20, and 21. So that is something that we do want to optimize for future budget, is to be able to get that delineation and get it more precise to what has gone to the rural communities.
Right. Okay. I'm wondering, following this meeting, if you could sort of send a breakdown of that 73.8 million, because when I'm looking at the investment across the wards, it's not adding up for me, but I'm probably missing some stuff. So, and I'm wondering how, I don't know if this is a question for Tammy or for Alain, but how is the maintenance of roads factored into what gets prioritized for resurfacing? Like our spend on maintenance?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. So we have a robust list of criteria that we use to prioritize candidates for road resurfacing on a yearly basis. And we also have our longer term forecasts. And one of the criteria is certainly with our roads operators and maintainers in terms of the costs that they invest in certain road segments, or if they also have challenges accessing roads during winter time for things like that. So we also have an operating consideration in the prioritization criteria.
Okay, so do we know which roads are costing us the most from a maintenance perspective?
So, Mr. Chair, we don't break it down at a road level. Because right now the way we track costs is typically at an activity level. So we'll know how much we spend on different types of maintenance. We haven't gotten it to the level to say of that, we've spent X amount on this road and not that road. That is something that we're evolving over time, but right now we have it more at an activity level.
Yeah, so when you say it's evolving, would it be possible? Because I think there's a case to be made that if we are spending a lot of money maintaining a certain road, that should climb up the priority list for resurfacing.
Correct. And what we do in the meantime is we do have close collaboration with Tammy's team, so that areas that the supervisors know that they're spending more time and effort on, through that dialogue with her team, they're able to factor that into the equation. And there are roads that will get readjusted based on that input. But it's part of, from Tammy's perspective, it's also part of their overall evaluation in terms of how does that input factor into other factors that they're also trying to consider. And if I could take a step back to the comment related to splitting the budget, because there is one that item coming out of the rural summit that we had committed to was to split the signalized intersections between urban and rural. We had that work pretty much done. Unfortunately, with the changes to the province in terms of the automated speed enforcement, we have not proceeded with that split now because there's been the uncertainty around the funding levels as we move forward. So as we look at the road safety action plan in the first quarter of next year, we'll be working with Cyril and his team to see, okay, is there an opportunity to start looking at splitting those amounts, or do we keep them pooled? The challenge with splitting things up is now you're dealing with smaller amounts in different areas. It's just going to take more time to be able to build up the funding to be able to proceed. So we want to make sure that we're providing committee with a fullness of options before we decide in terms of how we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that additional detail. Just going back to the spend. So Public Works, our roads teams are giving input into what is being prioritized. That is happening.
Correct. Through Quentin's team, yes.
Okay. It's going to be a little bit of Groundhog Day from PWIC last week, because I will say I am not satisfied with the investment that I am seeing in the East End. $73.8 million budget. Ward 19 is getting 4.3 million of that, despite, by my napkin math, being about 13% of the total road network for the city. And what's most concerning is when I look at the infrastructure map for Ward 19, it is bare. That's a 5-year forecast. And I did not wait until budget time. I have raised that I'm concerned about what's coming forward in that map. And trust me, the roads are not in tip-top shape. So I did have a meeting on site yesterday with some staff to talk about this. But when I'm looking at where the investment is going in other wards, I'm not understanding the strategy from an asset management perspective. And I'm very concerned that Ward 19 is being forgotten. So I won't be supporting the capital part of this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair.
Well, thank you for that segue, Councillor Kitts, because I have some questions that are related to what you were just talking about in terms of selection and spending on rural roads. So one thing I've noticed, and quite frankly been very frustrated with over the last 3 years, is hearing constantly from my residents about particular roads, looking at the plan for the next few years and not seeing any of those roads on there, and seeing roads on that list that I'm not hearing anything about from my residents. So I'm wondering, what weight does the councillor's office and the community have in terms of selecting road resurfacing and railroad upgrade projects? Because I think over the last 3 years, 1, maybe 2 roads that I've asked for have ended up in the ward highlights. And an example this year would be Carp Road. I've been asking Carp Road, and I thank you for paving Carp Road from the village to Thomas Dolan a few years ago. But in the plan this year, it looks like there's a resurfacing project being funded from Stiles Road to Goleta Side Road on Carp Road. Roughly the same distance as Carp Road from Kinburn Side Road to Thomas Dolan, which is in far, far worse shape. And I hear about it all the time, and I don't hear about Goleta Side Road or Carp Road from Goleta to Stiles. So how do we reconcile that?
Mr. Chair, perhaps I can start with the last part of the councillor's question. So the Carp Road, in some cases, we do some preservation treatment, and then that allows us to come back with not a full resurfacing project, but a mill and pave or shave and pave that we would call. So for that Carp Road section that you mentioned from Stiles to Goleta is that example. So it's not a complete resurfacing. We did preservation treatment a few years ago, and we are planning to go back and do a mill and pave. So those are some of the interventions that we have for road resurfacing. And my comments overall over our prioritization is it is a citywide approach. It is evidence-based in terms of the data that we take a look at. We have pavement quality index that we use. Our road asset management program was also recently audited by the Auditor General as a good value for money. And so we do invest a lot of time in, and we have the opportunity to refine that criteria as well. So it is a continuous improvement cycle that we do have. And in the spring, we also have our road shows that we do for all, that we offer for all councillors, so that we can talk about what is coming up in the next year and what is being forecasted. And we do have the opportunity during those meetings to take away that feedback. And so perhaps a better of the closing the loop and understanding why certain things and why not certain things. So that's a takeaway we can take back.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm happy to continue that conversation. But I do hope that in the future, the feedback from the public, the people who live in the community and drive those roads every day, have a bit more of an impact on the prioritization of those roads. And I appreciate that, you know, you need to take a data and evidence-based approach, but like I said, these are roads that my community, including myself, drive every single day, and it's hard to wrap your head around sometimes when you look at the priority list. Gonna talk about my ward highlights briefly. I did a deep dive on that last week or the week before, and with road resurfacing being the clear top priority for my residents, that spending's down 50.4% from last year. Rural road upgrades are down 76.7% from last year, and overall spending is down 6 million, representing a 14.6% decrease in capital investment in Ward 5. And that even includes the $10 million that's being invested in the expansion of Carp Road south of the 417, which is not in my ward. So considering very seriously also not supporting the capital budget here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank staff for the work that you've put into the budget and preparing it. I'll also echo that I appreciate the acknowledgement that there's still more work to coming out of the Rural Summit. I didn't think we would get to where we wanted to be all at once, and it's going to be an iterative process as we continue to refine what we're doing here at this committee and also in rural Ottawa. And you know, I hear a commitment from staff to continue to look at how we build our budgets. So the specific rural items do come back here, and you know, I'll raise one point, you know, with Tammy, that we've got a great municipal drainage team. They only report to us, but their budget is approved under the Environment Committee budget. Not that it is at any risk of not being approved, but there's that gap there where they functionally report through this committee and their funding is approved through another. So I think as we move forward, if there's that willingness to continue to look at how we refine how we budget and prepare that budget at the city, I think the next term of council and whoever is sitting in these chairs would appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge that many of the rural liaisons are here today, and we are going to meet as a rural affairs team and the liaison team for the first time since the Rural Summit. And that was a major takeaway that we actively champion for us, having those contacts in each of the departments. So when our residents need support, we know who we can go to fast track those answers. So I appreciate you all coming here today and being a part of the 2026 budget. I also want to acknowledge that a lot more has been done in our road work network rather in this term of council. And I believe, Cyril, it's about 50% more funding has been allocated over this term of council than the previous term. So I'm seeing that, but there's always more work to be done. I don't think we're ever going to be a part of a city where the roads, as Councillor Kit say, are in tip-top shape, but we're certainly making that progress. And as we move into the next term of council, I also hope that there's an opportunity to continue to look at how we prioritize the resurfacing of our network, because it is the number one, if not the number two concern that we hear alongside of ditching. And when residents call our office, I often wish I had the power to say, sure, crews will be out there tomorrow and the road will be fixed. And that's not ever going to be so, but as we make those improvements and continue to allocate tax dollars raised in rural Ottawa to be spent in rural Ottawa, I think we're going to see some of those benefits come about. I'm also encouraged that in the next term of council, there'll be another opportunity to host another rural summit where we'll have the check-in from what we've accomplished from the Rural Summit in 2024. I want to highlight specifically, and I don't know if Derek or Marcia will be best positioned to answer this, but over the last few weeks, we've had a few challenging files come forward, specifically with supporting rural businesses as they continue to grow in the city. And I want to make sure that through the rural affairs budget, that the program funding that we have in place to help support some of the rural businesses operate in the city of Ottawa, it's being targeted specifically to where it will do the most good, not how long it's been allocated to a specific section of the rural affairs budget. Is there a willingness from staff to take that back, to look at what we're doing and how we're doing it to make sure that we're maximizing those dollars?
To the chair, yeah, absolutely. We will take that as direction. I mean, we see some real benefit, and it kind of goes to the comment made earlier by a committee member around the staffing for the rural side. I mean, we want to use those 3 staff people effectively and really put a priority on this. And part of that for next year is reviewing where the money does get spent, what kind of connections do rural businesses, what are they looking for in terms of beyond the sort of core services we've been talking about right now, but what specifically could we be providing? And that might bring us back with additional program changes or other agreement changes, but we'll take a comprehensive look at that and engage with the agricultural rural businesses. And we're also very tied into the conversation that Debbie was talking about with the rural economic plan and really sort of seeing is there a gap that we need to fill. So we'll do that review and come back.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the willingness to take that away. And with the economic development strategy that we are developing for rural Ottawa, I'm excited to see how we're going to be able to support our businesses. Ottawa is one of the largest agricultural cities. I don't know if it's in Canada or in North America, but 80% of Ottawa is rural. And I want to make sure that we're helping these businesses continue to operate where they are, because it really is a good economic driver to not have to drive into the city every day. You can find employment in the rural area, and we want to make sure that we support that. So I'll be looking forward to seeing the results of that and through your team. They've been fantastic so far and engaging, and I look forward to seeing more of that good work happening. I also want to give one shout out to Laurel, our program manager in the Rural Affairs office. She's doing a fantastic job. There's no need to be nervous, Laurel. It's all positive comments from the chair today. It was probably one of the biggest takeaways from the Rural Summit to have someone who would work on our team, but maybe not a part of our team. And I think you've done a great job, Laurel. I always look forward to our monthly check-ins, and I'm sure after this, you'll just be really pleased to come up and thank me for mentioning you by name publicly at committee. She's the best I won't tell her husband that. My last comment before I think we're going to go to the vote is about ditching. It is one of the biggest pain points for rural Ottawa, certainly for me in my office, and I know my colleagues sitting here on this side of the table. It was the #1 listed commitment of the top 10 of the mayor coming out of the Rural Summit, and the expectation certainly of Mayor Sutcliffe and the 5 members of the Rural Affairs Committee is that we will see work happen in 2026. We will see a lot of work happen in 2026, and I appreciate that over the last probably 12 to 18 months that we've been working on this conversation, getting the financing piece in place, getting more of the operations on the ground pieces in place, that residents are going to notice that difference. I want to make sure that the new capital budget that we're allocating, first time since amalgamation that we're going to have that capital budget to carry out some of this work, that it's going to be leveraged to its maximum effect, certainly in 2026, but as we head into the next term of council, whether it's equipment, whether it's vendors that we need to engage with, whether it's city staff that we're working with, that everyone understands that it is the priority of this committee that this work be undertaken. And if there are any hangups, if there are slowdowns, red tape that needs to be eliminated, that you come back and ask us for help. Because I know when spring gets here and we're able to start ditching and digging and improving some of our drainage assets, I know there are 5 very interested members of council who look forward to seeing those crews working across our ward. So as long as staff understand and acknowledge that this is one of the top priorities of this committee, I have a lot of confidence that we're going to see the improvements that our residents are waiting to see.
Chair, you have my commitment on that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions or comments from committee members? Vice Chair?
I just want to thank you, Chair, for your amazing work on that file. It's extremely important to rural Ottawa, and you've done an amazing job leading it forward. And I look forward to seeing the results and continuing to work with you. But thank you so much for your work on that. I know it was a lot of work you did behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cyril?
Yeah, Chair, I just wanted a little bit of clarification just for Councillor Kelly and Kate, so maybe the room. So today, we'll be approving this capital program in terms of, not the full roads resurfacing. So there's not a lot here in terms of the roads resurfacing, as we talked about, just for point of clarification in terms of the actual capital budget here that you're approving.
So it's not that 73 point.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a 14.3 million, which the rural road upgrade is 2.6 million, and that's the conversion of gravel to asphalt. The larger issue that you spoke about is in the Pewick capital budget. Just for clarification.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the clarification, Cyril. So first I'll ask if the ditching motion moved on behalf of myself by the Vice Chair is carried.
It's carried.
Thank you very much. Now we'll do it in the right order. That the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee 2026 draft operating and capital budget as follows. 1, Planning, Development and Building Services, Development Review Rural and Rural Affairs operating budget as follows. I, User Fees, page 4. II, Operating Resource Requirement, page 3. And number 2, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee Capital Program, page 5, individual projects listed, pages 10 to 18, including the revised page 17. Is that carried as amended?
Carried with.
I'll still dissent.
Yeah, I'd like to dissent on number 2 as well.
I'll still dissent on number 2 as well.
So dissent on number 2 from Councillors Luloff, Vice Chair, and Councillor Kitts. So that component fails. So from the clerk's office, can we just get confirmation as to how this will rise to council?
Chair, the recommendation from the committee will include approval of the recommended approval of 1, and then council will have to consider a motion will be required to deal with the capital component budget. So council will consider that at the appropriate time.
Thank you. There are no in-camera items. I will mention that item 7.1 on the agenda under IPD is the Living Snow Fence Pilot Program. We have no registered speakers for the open mic, but I know we do have some notices of motion, so I'll throw it to the Vice Chair to read all those in, including one on behalf of myself.
Well, I'll start with that one, Mr. Chair, on behalf of Chair Brown. Whereas Rural Woodlands Ottawa has established a productive working relationship with the City of Ottawa's Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee through collaboration on initiatives such as Living Snow Fence Pilot Program. And whereas Rural Woodlands Ottawa and ARAC continue to advocate for retention and expansion of rural tree canopy in support of climate resilience, road safety, and rural quality of life. Therefore, be it resolved that in partnership with Ward 21 Councillor, the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee approve a small tree planting project at 2155 Roger Stevens Drive as a demonstration of the ongoing collaboration with Rural Woodlands Ottawa. And be it further resolved, the staff be directed to provide the necessary support and coordination to ensure that with planting proceeds in spring 2026, including engagement with Rural Woodlands Ottawa and any partners of the project. Thank you, Chair. And this one is on behalf of myself. Whereas the provincial planning statement 2024 section 4.3 on agriculture states that planning authorities are required to use an agriculture systems approach based on provincial guidance to maintain and enhance geographically continuous agricultural land use based on support foster the long-term economic prosperity and productive capacity of the agri-food network. And whereas PPS 2024, section 4.3.5.2 states that impacts from any new or expanding non-agricultural uses on the agricultural system are to be avoided, or where avoidance is not possible, minimized and mitigated as determined through the agricultural impact assessment or equivalent analysis based on provincial guidance. And whereas the PPS defines an AIA as meaning the evaluation of potential impacts on non-agricultural uses on the agricultural system, and that an assessment recommends ways to avoid, or if avoidance is not possible, minimize and mitigate adverse impacts. And whereas municipalities are encouraged to develop a terms of reference to establish consistent local expectations for the approach and scope of an AIA, and whereas additional guidance is required from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness to better understand the implications of and assist in implementing these policy directions. And whereas there are rural municipalities facing growth pressures throughout Ontario, which have already developed a terms of reference for an AIA and their jurisdiction, including Caledon, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and Dufferin County. Therefore, be it resolved that the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee recommend the Council approve the Mayor of Ottawa write to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Minister of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness to request an advancement of the agricultural impact statement terms of reference to implement the applicable policies in the PPS. And be it further resolved that staff from Planning, Development and Building Services Review use the terms of references for AIAs and other agricultural-based municipalities in Ontario and determine in terms of reference for an AIA in Ottawa is feasible on the interim basis until province updates their applicable guidance. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can we waive the rules and just pass that so he doesn't have to read it again next time? Or?
I'm getting really used to listening to the vice chair talk for 3/4 of the meeting. Are there any other notices of motion? None? Okay. I'm not seeing that there are any inquiries. Is there any other business? Seeing none, we'll stand adjourned until our joint meeting on Wednesday, December 17th. That joint meeting is with the Planning and Housing Committee. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great holiday.